are rolling in all the ways we can be rolling. Let me do a slate.
Hold on a second.
Sure.
I'm just looking for one.
That's just a sync slate.
Can't find my notes. All right, sure.
All right, so we are sitting here at Link Central, for lack of a better word, my house, with Mary Beth Hrin, who's running for mayor of Prescott. Oh, I forgot one thing. Just for continuity, because it's going to be intercut, I have to wear the same hat as I did yesterday. I just totally forgot about this. It's going to look weird if the hat's popping on off my head all. The two interviews are going to get cut together.
All right, good.
So I need to wear the same clothing as I did yesterday. Sorry about that.
That's okay. We'll just start it over. That's all. What's that missing? Really bugs me.
All set?
Sure.
So we are sitting here at Link Central, for lack of a better term. This is Mary Beth Hrin, who's running for Prescott Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you for having me.
Yesterday we interviewed Gene Wilcox. The reason I wanted to have both of you in, and really Gene Wilcox requested an interview, was because the two of you have been the targets of very negative attacks, far more against you than against her. In her case, whoever it was simply said she was a kind of a tax and spend liberal. We're going after her tax policies. With you, it's gotten much more personal. So I want to start first on the subject of dark money. Would you say that dark money has been influencing this election significantly?
That would be a gross understatement. It absolutely has. And I'm absolutely appalled the amount of dark money that's come into this election by outside interests in this little town of 40,000 people. It's never happened before in this mayor's election that we've had so much money coming in this town. And you're right. I think people themselves in this town should be able to decide who to vote for mayor based on the issues. Let's look at the candidates, their answers, what they stand for, research them on Facebook, their websites, and decide that. We can decide on our own. We're very intelligent people. But to have these kind of mailers come out, and you can see the 602 area codes, I find it obscene and offensive. For me personally, this has affected me very much. I have people coming up to me in the grocery stores that I have never seen before, and talk to me about it. And even if it's trying to be sympathetic to me, bottom line, I feel absolutely violated by this because they have released very personal information about me and twisted it where it's absolute fabrication. And I can't begin to tell you how disgusting this is to me.
I know you highlighted it very, very deliberately as your closing, the closing portion of your the League of Women's Voter candidate forum, and it was a very powerful thing. In fact, made the paper the next day. One note: you might want to speak up just a little bit for the mics. If I might ask, there's going to be a lot of people watching this who have never heard the phrase dark money before. What would be your definition of dark money?
Dark money, in my understanding of it, is people can donate. They don't have to. They remain anonymous. It's just that simple. What happened in my situation is this Max Foes, who runs IWS, who printed these flyers, he owns this company, and you can't get to who donated to pay or who paid for these flyers, and that is why I filed a lawsuit. One is very clearly defamation, false light. The lien that he references, the legal document that he references in the second mailer, he clearly misstates what he portrays in these mailers.
We'll go into the details of these.
Sure. And so in hopes in this lawsuit, because it is a tort lawsuit, that we can get to the people who actually donated to him in order to pay for it.
So in addition to basically trying to shut down his efforts, you're also trying to find out kind of who was behind all of this, which would be very telling.
It really will, and I think it'll be good. I think if people know that when you go out and defame someone, maybe they'll think twice.
Right.
And I also think, which I think what gives me some hope is that I think a lot of people were offended by it.
I think that's true. In fact, in fact, I have the printouts of the articles here. Let me just cite the dates correctly. And I did a lot of research here. The first thing that appeared in the Daily Courier was the announcement of your defamation lawsuit on August 3rd, and we have that lawsuit right here. Then on August 7th, wow, my eyesight is bad. On August 7th, Paul Dunn said that basically he basically came and said to your defense that what the flyer said was totally ridiculous. On then August 11th, you filed a second lawsuit citing campaign finance law violations. And then, I don't have it for some reason, but there was another reader who came to your defense, and for some reason that's missing. But she basically said, I believe it was she said, I'm not a supporter of Mary Beth Hrin, but this is awful.
Right.
So I thought it was really cool that somebody who was not planning on voting, she said, I do not plan on voting for Mary Beth, but this type of stuff we really don't need. And especially when it's coming out of city, you don't know if there's corporate interest behind this, if there's private developers maybe who are interested in influencing city government. You just don't know.
Sure.
My definition of dark money would be the kind of the money that can be easily shielded through a veil of a nonprofit or a trade union or a corporation. The money kind of gets cleansed. Normal campaign contributions are somewhat visible. It kind of gets cleansed and shielded, and then we start to have an election system that looks very much like what the mafia does when it cleans money to buy police officials and so on, to bribe officials. I mean, I've been watching all of the various documentaries available from the 70s and 80s about how Miami was taken over by the cocaine trade, and the system of cleansing of money there looks the same as very much like what occurs with a lot of these things. And people don't really know this happens at all levels of government.
Yes.
And we're seeing a local example here when, interestingly, you may not know this, but July 1st, I was participating in the parade with a local group called Move to Amend.
Mm-hmm.
Now, do you know much about them?
I've heard of it, and I've mostly heard of it because of the parade.
Yeah, well, they unfortunately carried a parade which said, we carried two banners, one of which was a little bit more aggressive or thought-provoking or challenging.
Right.
Challenging may be a good word. And it said, "Dark money is killing our elections," and the word "killing" was underlined. So I think honestly the security people were right to kind of pull us from the parade, but we weren't given a chance to just dump that sign or change it, or it should have been talked about way back in May when the application process was free. But what they believe is we need to get dark money out of elections. And actually at the time I wanted to write up about what is dark money, and I didn't really have a good local example. And then we have this occur. Yeah, a month later we have this occur, and I encourage you and everyone to learn about it, because these are not protest-oriented people. They are simply trying to overturn the Supreme Court decision, Citizens United, which says money is free speech, and if you want to cloak that through a corporation or a nonprofit or a trade union, then that's fine. You know, if you want to have unlimited money dumped on any level of election, that's fine.
Right.
I think that's wrong.
So especially, it does become really, it does taint it. It
right.
absolutely does.
Now, you're actually in your defamation lawsuit, which is this document, the associated motion for temporary restraining order actually has a very good description on page 4, which I'll read a little bit out of, which describes this thing. What they're doing here, and on the screen now you'll see a blow up of this document, is this is the first thing I received, and actually it wasn't mailed to me. I'm registered green. I think they were only targeting specific groups, possibly registered Democrats, and
They pretty much, this was such a widespread mailer. I mean, this is the amount of money they spent, because
Yeah.
I was shocked. They hit people that just had a Prescott address, because there were people out in Williamson Valley which clearly could not even vote in our election. And they were Democrats, Republicans, and I knew some independents that actually
Independents
got
as well.
it. So the amount of money, this was a very expensive mailer. One,
Yeah.
its size, its color, and the demographics that went to
I wasn't sure. I wasn't actually. It's good that you know that, because I wasn't sure how many people got it. I know I didn't. Interestingly, Jean Wilcox said she got it. Her husband, they're both registered Democrats.
Right.
One got it, the other didn't.
Right.
So maybe they were targeting household addresses, or I don't know what. But this was actually mailed to a friend's address. I happened to be house sitting at the time, and this came in their mail. So in the first attack, what they did basically was they dug up I believe this is from 2006, if I have my facts. No, that's the other one.
This is
2010.
10 or 8, I don't remember.
I'm sorry, I'm thinking of this one, the earlier one. So from 2010, you had been receiving some health care, and a subcontractor for Access, Phoenix Health Plan, put a lien out against an unnamed party, or I should say an adverse party.
Right.
And you were not involved in this at all.
Right. This is how this works. I went to the hospital, and I went to the hospital in a coma that day. I was on an experimental drug, an adverse reaction to it. And basically what they can do, and it's by statute they're permitted, they file a lien, and just assuming that I would file a lawsuit,
Right.
which I did not. And so that lien is filed publicly.
Right. This
against,
document's public.
correct, against, and if anybody could get that, and the adverse party is yet unnamed. So, but what this Max Foes did is twist it, that as if I had an unpaid medical bill,
Right.
and it's so blatantly false.
Right.
Anybody looking at that document.
No, they very directly say Mary Beth Hrin fleeced Arizona taxpayers when it's not you being
Yes,
named in
I
this
am
lien
listed
at all.
as the patient on that.
Yeah,
and
you're the
that's-
patient. You're not the person who is receiving this
Correct.
potential lien. Yeah, it's very misrepresentative, very defamatory. I hope you win your lawsuit. Unfortunately, I don't think it will curtail this group from potentially making further attacks. They may just simply have known that what they were doing was very illegal, and their strategy is simply win-win-win. So you know,
is. They're couching their defense as, well, this is political speech. It's protected, and it's political speech protected, but you can't go out and just lie.
No, you can't. You can't misrepresent fact.
Right.
You can misrepresent fact when you're talking in the abstract. Like I could go out and say, communism is a good thing. We need it because,
Right.
and I can make up whatever
Right.
I want. But when you're actually talking about a specific person, you need to stick to facts, or it becomes defamatory or libelous and so on.
Right, and
There are
this
laws.
really was to paint me in the worst light to the voters. It absolutely was to influence an election, and I think, and this is absolutely, like you described, what the purpose of dark money is.
Yeah, and but I should also say there is also, for example, you mentioned. There's two things you mentioned. I attended your meet and greet up at the Honda dealership on July 18th, I believe, and I took extensive notes. Initially, you thought that this was coming from the Firemen's Union. They've said they've had nothing to do with it. We don't know who funds this sort of thing, because it's a major funding. Who the interested parties are who put the money behind this fellow. What's his name again?
Max Foes.
Max Vos. That's not known because it is dark. But the other thing I wanted to mention, and I thought this was an interesting point, is you also mentioned how Greg Mingarelli, who is the one candidate who has not received these kind of negative attacks, is also sitting apparently on a somewhat of a war chest of upwards of $75,000 to $80,000 in dark money.
I think it's. I don't know dark money, but I would surmise with the radio, the television, the signage. I would, and if you look at negative advertising against the other two candidates, I would
Right.
put it well over 100,000.
Yeah, well, he's claimed that he has nothing to do with these attack ads, and whether you believe him or not is whether you believe him or not. But where I'm headed with this is we kind of have an unlevel playing field just in terms of the funding between the candidates. Now, there is...
and you know what, and I'll just stop you there, because any candidate is free to raise as much money as
Right.
they're able to, and that's fine.
Well, I question that, but
Well,
that's another story.
That's reality. But I think the frightening thing is when you have a couple people here that are able to do that. And I think what I've heard from people, that it is kind of obscene in a way, that again, this town of 40,000 and this little mayor's race, and all of a sudden you have this vast amount of money come into this little race. Like, where did this come from? When you ran for mayor, it was like, okay, 15, 20,000 for a couple signs in people's yards and
Right.
radio ads, and now all of a sudden it's never before seen, and it becomes a game changer when you're going to run for mayor. That now you have to raise 100,000. People's eyeballs start to open up. It becomes it's a game changer on who even wants to even put themselves out
Right.
to run.
And then you also have to question why now? Why is this election seen as significant by whoever is funding these things? We have major development coming up. We have airport expansion being discussed. We also have the the Kirkland mine operation, which is really outside of Prescott city limits, but that's another mining development.
There's, you really cannot neglect to talk about the public pensions and
There's the pension funds. That's true. Yes. The disturbing thing is that it is unknown what the sudden interest is, and what the sudden influx of money is. And I kind of partially agree with you that candidates should be free. Under the current system, it is true. Candidates should be free to raise as much money as they can or they want. But I see there as being two changes necessary. You may not agree with me. Being kind of affiliated with Move to Amend, I first of all think that we have to get rid of this notion that money is just blanket free speech and that it can be hidden through nonprofits, corporations, and trade unions as well, that you can have unlimited either positive donations for a positive campaign, like to take out signage or radio ads or newspaper ads, what have you. That's what I would think of as being positive advertising, or negative advertising in this case. I don't think it should be invisible or protected speech, in that you shouldn't know who's making that speech. When somebody says something, you know who's saying it. They're saying it. That's what I think the founders of the Constitution had in mind. You can see the person. He's right there. He may take his lumps. He may not be employed if he's a rebel and speaking out. He may not be employable. You take your lumps on free speech. Here we don't know who the
I
interest
agree.
is.
I wish the disclosure period was a little bit before
Yeah.
the end of this election. Like, it seems the way it falls is right as the ballots are due, and I think we could have that period.
In fact, today, I believe, is when there's a filing deadline, at least according to Gene Wilcox, there's a filing deadline for financial disclosure today.
I think it was a couple days ago, but we'll just find out about it.
Yeah, I'll be very interested in researching that. I want to find out for all the mayoral candidates what are the financial disclosure statements, because that should be part of a follow-up piece to this interview. Is, well, here's the numbers that won't include this.
Well, absolutely.
This
not
is
outside. Any of those,
This
right.
is outside of anyone's campaign.
But you will see who's donated to all of our campaigns.
Right.
And again, anybody who's even given me a $20 bill, everyone's name will be listed. And I think it is important for voters to say, wow, who is exactly voting or backing these candidates? And you make an excellent point. Which developers are donating to the candidates?
I mean, I've said on camera before, this is years ago, we used to do these link-ups, public open-air kind of free speech things. And many years ago I said, what typically happens in a lot of towns is a major development interest will come in. The put a lot of money into the town council. They'll back re-election campaigns and so on. Then once they have the town council and the mayor, they will also with the ranchers that, like if it's a fracking interest or just to put a, what do you call it, a wind wheel, what do you call it?
Talk about wind power?
Wind power, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It's not just oil interests.
Sure.
I don't want to target that one industry. But when you have industry kind of coming in, they will sign these non-disclosure agreements with all the ranchers. The ranchers then can't talk about what they are being paid, whether they're happy or not with the company, whether the company met all its obligations. They're basically mute. And these companies kind of roll in, and the towns kind of get overwhelmed. A few dollars get dangled in front of them.
Well, I actually posted an article on my Facebook page, but it had to do with public pensions. It had to do with a candidate saying, I want to run for council, but here's my position on public pensions. We need to, we can't afford this anymore. But what's my chance of being elected? Because they started talking about the union bosses coming in and how much money they can funnel into an election against that candidate.
Right.
And I posted that on my Facebook page.
I think it's great that you present it from that standpoint, sort of a conservative standpoint. It's equally valid to the trade unions as it is I always frame it as corporate interests. But basically, when you have these moneyed interests in, it becomes very unfair. When you have lobbying interests that are out of control, and the average Joe or the average rancher couple struggling to make a living isn't adequately represented, it's a problem. So I see there's change being needed. Let's very briefly touch on the second one, which is really actually digging back further. This is digging back to when you were in
Pennsylvania,
in Philadelphia. This was a you can look up this court case online. See, this is the problem. People will read this and they won't know how to, or won't take the time to dig out. I actually couldn't find this case on
other people could. It was amazing because
on the PACER system, on the federal judicial system.
Well, it's a state court case, so
it says U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. That's federal court.
It shouldn't really.
Yes. Maybe they are misciting the court that this is in.
Yeah, that was state court.
Okay,
anyway.
that would explain why I couldn't find it, because I saw the case number there was a third-party document that I did locate, had a case number on it. On the federal system, I couldn't locate that, so that explains it.
And again, this is like so offensive.
Interestingly, it didn't say the court.
When you actually go into that and read the court case.
Let's go into that, because
sure.
I believe, did I print that one out? I hope I did. Well, it basically goes like this. You were hit by a car.
I was riding my bicycle, yes.
It was hit and run.
Yes.
You put in an insurance claim with Allstate Insurance.
On my auto insurance, correct.
Through your auto insurance.
Correct.
Your auto insurance covered you as a bike rider?
They did.
That's an interesting auto insurance. I want that kind of insurance.
No,
it's like inclusive. Oh, it's against people hitting you, like if you're a pedestrian or something.
Correct.
Oh, okay. So through your auto insurance, you're covered as a cyclist or a pedestrian.
Correct.
I didn't know that. So then your insurance company, Allstate Insurance Company, basically attempted not to pay.
Correct.
As insurance companies will do.
Shocking.
You sued in their state court in Philadelphia.
Well, actually, they sued me.
They sued you?
Yeah, they said, no, you're not. They took me to court to say, we don't want to pay on your insurance, even though I've been paying for years and years. They took me to court. And
they cited basically as one of their main points that the insurance policy was at your husband's address, and
no, it was actually. I had to stretch my memory. My husband took the policy. He actually we switched insurance companies. So he took the old policy and said, it was Travelers, and we went to Allstate and said, here, this is the insurance I want. Well, the new insurance agent didn't write it up exactly the way when he handed it. It said duplicate it.
Right.
So that's actually how Allstate lost the case, because
they cloned your old address based on the old policy.
No, they didn't.
Somehow an old address or
no. Okay, it gets.
gets more
I was
complicated?
separated from my husband at the time of the accident.
I didn't
so,
want to.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they first tried to say, well, you weren't living with your husband.
Yeah.
So you're not insured.
They basically tried to get out just on the basis
every which way they could.
Yeah, and the address was an easy target for them.
Sure.
Interestingly, the jury said, no, that's not. No, we read the policy. It's not enough to just simply pull the plug on this payment.
Right.
So you won the case.
Correct.
But then years and years later, you have this fellow saying,
this guy makes
you used a fake address.
Right, exactly.
There was a phantom car,
Right.
which is just simply the insurance term for hit and run.
Correct.
It's an unknown driver.
Correct.
Phantom car.
Right. And so again...
Yeah, and actually it's interesting. He cites the beginning of the judge's opinion, and this actually matches the judge's opinion document, but he leaves out what happens after the comma, which is... I'm paraphrasing, but the jury still found that that wasn't enough of a reason to deny the case. So obviously they're going to leave that out because it doesn't suit their purposes.
Right, and that's kind of what my attorney said. He writes, he says that half a sentence and then ignores the next 11 pages where the jury finds in my favor.
Well, you can't fit an 11-page opinion on
Right, but it's...
But at least you could cite the correct court so people could look up this document. That's I think, pretty egregious that source, and then they incorrectly cite the source.
So, but again, to paint the person in the worst possible light,
right.
that you have no scruples, you're using fake addresses, and you're making stuff up. It was so offensive. But again, here it is. When you read that case, it talks about, because there's testimony from my ex-husband, and so it's... Like I say before, I feel violated with all this.
Yeah, it gets into ugly stuff, and I didn't want to go into this thing, but you said basically that you're receiving medication. We should say that was relating to your service as a police officer in Philadelphia, so you were entitled to that.
No, it was related to my bicycle accident.
Oh, it was related to your bicycle.
Right, yeah.
I received incorrect information.
Yeah.
Somebody had said you'd received injuries as a police officer.
I was. But it was a result of that bicycle accident.
Right.
So
the same one.
Yes,
in this
that
one.
one.
That must have been a very traumatic accident.
Yes, it was.
I mean, from my days as a bike rider, I was in very bad accidents, but fortunately was never hurt beyond just like road rash and stuff like that. So, okay, well we're done with this. This stuff needs to go away.
But
yeah,
here's the frightening thing is, these people can just take anything in anybody's life and twist, and that's the frightening thing I think for anyone. And I'd like to leave your listeners with this: this is what prevents really good people from running for office, because you're like, oh my gosh, I would like to serve, because it's a call to public service. That's why I decided to run for mayor. But then this gives you pause, like, oh my gosh, what else could they just twist in my life? And I think for people sitting on the sidelines, I've heard this. Well, I would like to run for school board, or maybe I would like to run for council, but look what they did for you, and it's a shame. So we don't have good people with just great ideas and really want to serve their fellow citizen. Who would want to do this if you get raked over the coals and people don't give a chance to explain? How do you get a chance to explain this? You don't. So I appreciate the chance to explain this. I really do.
Well, I'm making a point of highlighting this because I think it was very ugly what occurred, and this is the type of thing that obviously you're fighting it in court, but I think more fundamentally when it influences elections, there has to be better election law, not simply saying anything goes. I think anything goes is a very dangerous thing when you have moneyed interests, and that works at all levels of government.
Right.
Okay, let's move on. Let's start now talking about some of the specific things that were discussed in all the candidates' forums. Let's begin with Proposition 443.
Okay.
And actually, before we do that, Gene Wilcox and I briefly talked about Proposition 442. It's kind of like the invisible proposition on the ballot that nobody understood. And it took me a long time to figure it out, too, what this home rule issue is. Do you have any issue with yes on 442?
Absolutely yes on this. We need this. we really don't want the state dictating. So
Right.
no qualms.
It basically says the state is telling us this, but we can make up our own mind
Correct.
about how we want to budget things in for city services. And I think it's a great idea. There was no opinions for or against, which made it a little harder to research.
Right.
But it's
Right.
something the current town council proposed, and it has to be done as an ordinance with voter opinion. But
Right.
that should be. I think Gene Wilcox's words were that should be a no-brainer.
Right, a resounding yes on
A
that.
resounding yes. Now, here's where we'll get into where you and I disagree, but I do want to explore, and I did research your video, which I thought was really compelling, on the, I forget the name of your website, this website,
VoteMaryBeth.org.
votemarybeth.org.
But my video is also on Facebook.
Yes. The hour and three-quarter video with questions. It's an hour of lecturing and then 45 minutes of questions. I thought it was very, very compelling, and it did highlight a number of problems with the PSPRS pension allocation system, the way it exists, the way certain either up to a certain point, certain yearly percentage hikes were guaranteed. Now it's more based on cost of living adjustments. But it highlights a number of the problems of this system. I want to explore, well, first of all, you're no on Proposition 443, very resoundingly. And you've done a lot of research into PSPRS, and you think it's a very, very flawed system.
Yes, and I'll tell you, I've done more research on public pensions than any candidate. I started researching this well over 2 years ago, and that's probably just part of the reason I'm a no on it. But I do understand the system, and I understand the intricacies of it. So when I hear the stand for Prescott, and I hear it's going to be paid down in 10 years, and I can tell you mathematically it's impossible with the projected revenue.
It's a pretty stiff pay down, yeah.
So I can get into a lot of fancy vocabulary, and they'll say, well, that's just your numbers. And I'm like, yeah, but it's my numbers based on thousands of hours of research. So,
no, I appreciated the level of research you'd done. I actually study science and mathematics quite a bit, and I don't really find fault with the nature of your analysis. There's a couple of places where you kind of go after, and this is accurate, the financial forecasting, like how much will we need to pay in future years. That's a forecasting model, which is inherently flawed. You're trying to forecast things you can't possibly predict, kind of like the weather without having an accurate weather model. You have a sense of how weather works. This is like, I grew up in the days in the 70s when the first computer models for forecasting actually came about, and initially they could only go out about 48 hours and be reasonably accurate. Now you can do more or less a whole week. So where I'm headed with this is, I think that you're correct that a lot of the predictors for future behavior are not quite correct, but that doesn't necessarily mean a doomsday scenario like we did see even before the 2008 turndown, even further back by 8 years with the tech bubble kind of bursting. You started to see the cost of the pension fund rise a lot, and that's caused a lot of problems in many states. Michigan, Arizona, there's
Kentucky, New Jersey,
yeah,
Illinois.
There's a lot of
it's
states.
Virtually Rhode Island, Connecticut. I mean, it's virtually across the entire country, wherever there's public pensions and a defined benefit system, because of the expected rate of return.
Can you explain the difference between a defined benefit system and a more 401k-like system?
Sure, that's called defined contribution. Defined benefits is we promise the officers a stream of income, a pension.
Right.
Where a defined contribution is the officer puts away a certain his money, and that the employer may or may not contribute as well. And at the end of that employment, the officer gets what's in that fund, the money.
Plus interest, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. With a defined benefit, which is what PSPRS is, the officer contributes and the employer contributes. But we promise them that stream of income at the end. So, and then we take these contributions and we invest them. Okay. So whenever those investments don't meet what we think they're going to meet, the taxpayer has to make up the difference because we are promising them a stream of income.
So translating that into kind of ways that people can kind of understand. It's in a way, it's a little bit like the difference between, let's say, a savings account where there's a fixed return on what's there, and that's guaranteed, as opposed to, let's say, a 401k plan, which is going to be more market dominated. And certainly in 2008, 2011, we had such a downturn. 401k plans didn't do very good. So in the defined benefit system, you're kind of just guaranteeing payment no matter what the market does. So if the market goes down, taxpayers have to make up for it so that the retiree or the pensionee, is that a word? Pensioner. The pensioner can receive the amount that has been guaranteed by law. And you're saying that's a problem because in those times when the market goes down, taxpayers are overburdened.
It's very simple. Exactly correct.
Not necessarily.
In defined benefit,
cities' budgets are overburdened, not necessarily taxpayers, because it's not necessarily paid through solely by taxes.
It's the taxpayer makes up the difference. Is exactly it. That's the only where you get the money from.
It's being funded out of the general fund, which is being paid into by a number of means, but primarily by sales tax.
Right. But defined benefits, the taxpayer makes up the difference. Defined contribution, there's no difference to be made up.
So you would favor more a model of defined, not defined benefit. What was the name of the
defined contribution?
Defined contribution. You would favor more a system like that.
Here's the deal: defined benefit system can work. In Wisconsin, it works. Mm-hmm. But the way this PSPRS system is set up right now, we don't have any fail system set in place. For example. The COLA, cost of living increase. Right now, our retirees are getting a COLA, cost of living increase, no matter what the funded ratio is.
Right.
Right now, we're only funded at 46%, which means we only have overall, we only have 46 cents for every dollar we're promised out. In Prescott itself, it's even worse. We only have 28 cents for the police department and 24 cents for the fire. I mean, it's switched actually.
Right.
But so think of how frightening those numbers are. So if you're still giving the retirees that COLA increase, no matter how low that fund is, it's only going to get worse. Now, Wisconsin, the difference is if that fund starts to drop, the COLAs for the retirees stops until the fund gets healthier.
Right. They basically say if we're having trouble meeting the obligation, then we're going to
round shit back, like shut the spigot off, so to speak.
And that's what the average person experienced in 2008. I know I had a 401k plan, and I made a point of not looking at it for 3 years because I didn't want to have depression in my life. So I basically just came back, and lo and behold, it had dipped, and it came back to exactly where it was, pretty much. And basically, 3 years of interest were just gone. So I didn't suffer as much as most people because I left it alone.
Well, it's no different than stock dividends. A corporation, we're now earning dividends stop. But that's so. These are some of the things like Prop 124 that we all voted on.
Right.
This new tier 3, they don't get COLAs until the fund goes back up to 70%.
Plus, also the new tier 3 has the option where the fireman or policeman or emergency worker can basically. I shouldn't say emergency worker because it applies also to some of the attorney general staff, like the attorneys, I think, in the law enforcement side.
No, that's just PSPRS.
Oh, that's PSPRS. Okay.
They just did one for CORP, correction officers, just this past legislative session.
Oh, okay.
But Prop 124 was just PSPRS.
Okay. I'm not sure who it applies to and who doesn't. The where I was headed with this is, gosh, now I got derailed. Oh yes, in tier 3, basically the retiree can choose what balance between more 401k like and more guaranteed payment they could do. They can kind of speculate a little bit.
Well, they can choose between a pure defined contribution or a hybrid of defined benefits.
Right. They can kind of choose the formula for their own needs.
And here's the deal: if more of the officers don't choose the defined contribution and they choose more the defined benefits, then the cost savings that they had projected, we're not going to get.
Right.
Because then, once again, the taxpayers are on the hook for that difference when we don't meet that expected rate of return. me give your listeners something to think about. Just 2 years ago, that expected rate of return was 7.85%. Now they've dropped it to 7.4. But even at that, we have historical data that we haven't really met that for 30 years.
Right.
I mean, 30 years, it was 7.4. Well, it was 9 is what they projected on average for the last 30 years. So every time we don't meet that, the taxpayer has to kick in the difference. That's why we've gone from 2000, or it was 1998, we were 116% funded. Fabulous. More money than we needed. And right now, we stand at 46% funded.
Right. And then also a very good point your video makes is that a few years ago, there started to be a series of actuarial changes which kind of took into account longer lifespans for people, the longer, possibly the earlier they might retire, whatever. It basically bumped up the liability that Prescott in particular would be seeing. So there's this ramping up of the liability. We don't really have anything keeping a pace in terms of funding that liability.
Well, I got some more bad news for you. They're changing it again this year.
I don't doubt it. I think there are inherent problems in PSPRS, and tied into that was the change made, I think this was with Proposition 124, you correct me if I'm wrong, in which it now requires constitutional amendments to make changes to how PSPRS is defined in Arizona, right? It has to be...
It's been that way since 1998.
Oh, it's been that way since 1998.
Yeah,
so it wasn't Proposition 124.
No.
It preceded that.
Right, and I think in 1998, see, the funds were put in the general fund. And I think in 1998, the legislature passed a bill, no different than Prop 124. The legislature passed the bill first, and then they refer it to the voters, and the voters have to approve it. So that's what happened. The legislature passed a bill in 1998 and said, we don't want these funds swept. So it passed a bill like, let's have constitutional protection. And the voters say, good idea. Which they meant, like, don't sweep the funds anymore. Let's protect the funds. And that's the way it was billed to the voters in 1998. And then 16 years later, the Supreme Court reads Prop 100 as you can never diminish or impair these benefits. So I don't really believe the voters would have voted for Prop 100 if it meant the officers never have to contribute 1 penny more.
Well, I don't have a lot of faith in the voters making wise decisions. I mean, I hate to say this, but when all of the decisions have to be made by the voters, legislature says, this would be a good idea, I support it, and then the voters decide on it, a lot of bad choices get made than if you simply allow the legislators to do their best to kind of manage these shifting things in the economy or shifting trends in actuarial analysis and so on, and kind of smooth out these bumps. So I think that's a big problem. Whether or not there's anybody in the state willing to take on like major reform of PSPRS, I don't know.
Well, there are. I mean, Representative Campbell and Representative Stringer are trying to do it, but here's the problem. Now that it's constitutionally protected, the way the Supreme Court read it, and that's I say this all the time.
Supreme Court of Arizona.
Supreme Court of Arizona.
Right.
Correct. We have a law, and in a way, nobody knows what it is until the court says, this is what the law is that you passed.
Right.
So, and that's what's happened. The Supreme Court of Arizona says, this is what Prop 100 means. So, you're right. We have this. We have these pension benefits, and now, if we have legislators saying, you know what, these fire districts, municipalities, we really can't afford these pension benefits anymore.
Right.
Maybe we could tweak it, like not have these COLAs. We can't do that now. We have to go through all this.
It's a big deal.
Yeah, it is a big deal.
It's a big deal to mount a constitutional amendment. I think there's bottom line though, is there's two real ironies to this whole thing. One is, I think I mentioned this to one of the candidates. I can't remember if it was you or somebody else at one of the forums. I basically said one of the ironic things, and as I think about this is number one in my mind. It's really Proposition 443 is not up to any of the candidates to decide. It's up for the voters to decide. Right. And then whichever way it goes, whether it's yes or no, whoever is elected mayor, whoever is elected to the 3 new seats of the town council, city council, It's up to them to administer it. Even if they would have liked to have had it gone the other way, like let's say it passes and you're elected mayor, it's your job to make that sales tax go, you shall, I have the proposition right here.
Shall be dedicated.
You shall, yeah. The revenue from which, referring to the 0.75% bump, the revenue from which shall be dedicated to the payment of the city's unfunded liability to the PSPRS, taking effect January 1st,
Right.
2018. So, regardless of who's elected mayor, and this dovetails in with another question coming up, they will simply take the voters' decision and administer PSPRS based on the funding that is available. Now, I think one of the points you made is that there's no obligation in the language that says this new money coming into the general fund goes to PSPRS, but it seems pretty clear right here.
No, I didn't. No, my problem is, to me, it was billed as we will pay down the pension liability.
Right.
It is very clear from the ballot language that 443 money will pay our pension liability.
Right.
That's very clear.
Okay.
What I'm saying is the only way to pay down the pension liability is that you must pay more than just your bill. If you use 443 money to pay your pension liability and you don't use general fund money along with 443 money, you're never going to pay it down. We've always been paying our bill, and pension liability keeps increasing.
Right. So basically what you're saying is there's a twofold problem. One is how are we going to fund it the way it is structured today? And the second problem is how can we improve this with support from the firemen's and policemen's unions to make a new system that is equitable. Like you were citing the Wisconsin system, which has kind of like some safety features where if the fund doesn't do well, sorry guys, you got to hold off on a bit while we make the fund more, we repair the fund, we get the fund back up here, or we get some funding in to pay down the liability. I think that's perfectly valid, but again, that has to be done at the state level. So the city of Prescott can voice its opinion, but it's up to our state legislators to make that actually happen.
Right, but I'll tell you from spending a lot of time in the legislature, they will not do that unless they get the pressure from the bottom, and it has to
Right.
come from
Not just Prescott, but
all the mayors.
All
And that's
the
why I feel so strongly for running for mayor, because I have the knowledge on this. And Mayor Oberg started the Mayor Summit, and he has about 15 mayors. But you really need a mayor who understands the system and really can continue that and galvanize the other mayors, because a lot of them, they don't understand their own problem. They don't understand how the system works. And so when you explain to them, even if you pay your bill, it's still going to ratchet up, because I can start rattling off like level percentage of payroll growth, and that's their amortization, and it sounds fancy words, but I can break it down to people to understand, like,
Right.
This isn't your fault. You know, this is the way the system's been managed, and these decisions are out of your control. But until we keep putting pressure on the legislature, across all of us together, the pressure's got to be so hot, like that pot's got to boil down in Phoenix. Because where these legislators sit, it's all good.
I have two questions, simple questions. How would you overall grade Mayor Oberg and how his office has been handling the payment of the liability so far?
He's done the way we've always done. I
think
he's done an excellent job of really educating the other mayors. It is now he's put a lot of pressure. He started some things that no other mayor's done in this city. We're now getting press in the Arizona Republic.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff that hasn't happened before ever. And he's been on the forefront. He's gone down to the Capitol and testified. I mean, he's known around the state on this. And he's by far the most knowledgeable mayor. And that's got to continue. So I really kudos to him for what he's done. Absolutely.
I just want to make sure there was no... but a lot of people in referring to PSPRS refer to mismanagement of how it's been paid down in the past, and I don't really see it. I think it's been, from what I can see, it's been handled pretty responsibly. But it is, like you say, year by year, the liability varies by so many forces. It's a very complex formula.
Well, first of all,
the board that figures this out uses a very complex formula
right.
based on those actuarial things you're referring to. and it goes up and down by greatly every year, and you just do your best to hit whatever the liability is that year.
Well, we get that number from PSPRS board.
Right.
It's not like it's not like a credit card minimum payment. I
Right.
don't want people to have this misunderstanding, and so it's not that
No, it's complicated.
we have ever mismanaged our funds. People have to understand the way that they calculate all those actuarial assumptions. They have guaranteed that all of these entities, not just Prescott, have paid too little into it. It's because of the way they have that expected rate of return set. It's the way they amortize this liability over 20 years. This is guaranteed. All of us have left too little into the trust fund. This is not our fault.
Yeah, and the voter, whenever, here's another question. The voter, whenever they hear anything kind of fire or police related, your heart goes out and you want to do. So I think people tend to vote very positively when police and fire services are affected, and so certain bad ideas could be put on the books, basically being sold on the basis of just the police or fire being involved. In fact, we're going to talk about one later, I think.
And that's what I want to make clear too. I was a police officer in
Right.
Inner City, Philadelphia,
Right.
and I know how hard that job is. And people don't understand is if we don't correct the system, that system will not be there. It's and I feel sorry for these guys that are driving the patrol car around the streets. When I did my presentation in Bisbee, I had an officer follow me out of the room. I was like, oh man, I'm going to get yelled at again. He came up to me, he shook my hand, he said, thank you for doing this. They've been lying to us for years. And he meant the PSPRS board. And this was the police chief of Bisbee who said this to me. He said, you're telling them the truth. They have to understand that this system is not going to be there for them.
What changes do you think would be wise to make in PSPRS funding?
Well, they call it. Like I said, the more that it's given out without the fund returning to a healthy level, it's going to drain the fund.
So you're basically saying you would like to adopt a system kind of similar to the Wisconsin system
Absolutely.
that you were talking about being a successful system.
Right, because the ones that are at the end of tier 2 or in tier, I don't see how the system's going to be there. I mean, I joke, but it's not a joke. There's no printing press in Prescott City Hall. There's no printing press. Doug Ducey doesn't have one. I mean, federal government does, but we don't.
Right. Okay, we can move on. Let's go on to this next major topic, and that is one concern I have is I see all I can't even count all the there's two city council candidates who didn't make it to the I've lost track of how many there are.
They only made it to one, I think.
Yeah, I think there's 7 city council candidates and plus the 3 mayoral candidates. To a man, with the exception of the 1 or 2 people who haven't spoken, it seems to be there's a green light for the airport expansion and also for the Deep Well Ranch development, which is a development that might potentially double the size of Prescott over the course of about 25 years. There's a lot of complexities to that involving, we are kind of strapped for cash right now, so how do we fund expansion while also dealing with our current kind of fiscal situation? How do we find water? How do we bind everyone into the sewer system? I want to talk about these things independently. Let's first start talking about the Deep Well project. I have a lot of concerns personally, and I know a lot of friends of mine who are sitting on maybe on the progressive side who are a little bit leery of seeing major expansion to Prescott. We understand the economic reasoning, the economic opportunity is there, but we also see potentially a diminution of what is special about Prescott. It is kind of a special small place, and we get a lot of new people coming in, new developments, new shopping centers and so on. It can kind of change the life. How would you address those concerns about expansion being maybe too fast or too unregulated? That's a bad word, but uncontrolled.
It is a concern. I'm a bicycle rider, so I don't like my roads clogged. So it is valid. But here's what I think about the Deep Well Ranch. Number one, that property would be developed anyway, whether or not we annexed it into the city.
Right.
It's just that simple. it's his private property.
Mm-hmm.
And I really believe it would behoove us to annex it into the city, which it is, because at least we do have control of it. It goes under the land or city development code then. If he didn't, and I used to live out in Williamson Valley when I first got here, that to me is an abomination. When you have 2-acre plots with unregulated wells and septic systems, and you have different areas where people build all different kinds of housing, and the roads don't even have to be paved, and the dust and everything else. My next door neighbor, she bought the house after, she had almost a ½ acre of grass. She started dropping the wells in our whole neighborhood. What did she care? She wasn't paying for the water. Where at least if it's annexed into the city, then they're on tiered water rates. If you want to have some kook watering a lawn, she'll pay dearly for it.
Right.
So this is the kind of thing I think it's really important to understand. And then the effluent, that all goes back into the water portfolio, things that we really can control. So yes, it is, I don't want to see it, but at the same time, the Deep Well Ranch, this is a 40 to 50 year project before it's completed. Will growth happen? It will. But we have to keep things in perspective and to understand we can't stop it, but at least we can control it the best we can. So that's what I say to that, because the alternative is to have it looking like Williamson Valley that's horrific to me.
Just kind of scattershot in county land, yeah.
And then have really no control of the water.
I think Gene Wilcox said then you have multiple straws going into this drum.
And it's a nightmare.
Yeah.
It really is a nightmare. They'll use way more water than you ever would with a plant development when they're paying for it.
Right. I can see that point of view. How can we guarantee that more than one income level of new resident is supported? In other words, I would like to see all income levels supported. You need to have support for the working poor, lower middle class, the working people who are not necessarily able to afford their own house, 3-bedroom house or something. How can we make sure that with this expansion kind of comes equal opportunity for all and not simply opportunity for those who can afford to buy the new houses?
Difficult. It is. You can, I'm not sure what exactly they're only halfway through the P&Z process.
Right.
I don't know how much pressure we can put on them there's apartments on one part. I know their affordable housing is $200,000. So that's what they.
Well, with HUD grants, that is roughly affordable, especially if you're, let's say, a single woman, you can get a special grant that way.
But that is what they have in there.
Single woman with a child, I should say.
Yeah. So that is what they offer to the community. That's what they consider workforce housing.
Right, workforce housing. That was the phrase I wasn't at the top of my head, but. It concerns me a little. The other thing that concerns me a little bit is we don't want to see the downtown become a slum. Like, ironically, a lot of people when I first moved here referred to the Lincoln Street area as kind of slum. And I'm from New York City. I looked at that and I said that by no means is that a slum. I know what a slum is.
Really? I was an university police officer. I get it.
Yeah. So I thought that was kind of an interesting point of view. It's a lower income area, but I've never felt unsafe walking there.
Really? Me either.
And I lived a few blocks from there, in fact, for a long time, no issues. So what the other concern is how do we prevent like a devaluation of the downtown as the center of population goes north? My concern is slower is better. Slower and more controlled is better. And I was kind of concerned to see each and every candidate kind of giving an implicit thumbs up. And nobody's saying, well, a couple of people voiced certain concerns. Let's not do it too rapidly. Let's make sure the water study comes in. We're working from an informed point of view in terms of what we're drawing from the Big Chino potentially if we build pipelines, or just generally the impact on the Verde River aquifer. And so I did see some kind of cautionary things, but overall I'm seeing, let's go, let's go, let's go. And nobody's saying, well, hold up. An alternative point of view is let's take it slow, let's take it easy, let's not mess with Prescott too much.
Well, he's entitled to the 900 acre feet. That's from a previous water agreement back when Rollie Simmons was mayor. So that 900 acre feet has been previously, that water agreement's been done way before. So that's why when he was asked to be annexed into the city, that was kind of a no-brainer for the city, and that's why Gene and I agree on this on this project. For that, it really did behoove us because he was entitled to the water anyway. So it wasn't like, that's why a lot of times I think people are like, where are we getting the water from? That was already in our water portfolio that was sitting there, knowing that he was going to develop his project, his ranch someday. And so it was there, it was already allocated to him. It wasn't like we're scrounging like, okay, now he wants to develop it, where do we get the water from? It was sitting there waiting for him, not allocated to anyone else.
Also tied into this, let's talk about the airport expansion. The airport expansion really is being driven by two things. One is, as we grow, we would like to have better connectedness with transportation systems. The airport being more functional would certainly make sense. How do we make sure, and the other side of it is it could potentially benefit the firefighting squads to have bigger planes able to land at the airport with longer runways. How do we make sure that the airport expansion similarly isn't just for those who can afford the higher airfare? In fact, I went on a family trip just last week to Boston, and nowadays Greyhound has this really good fare. You can get $10 and you can get to Phoenix. But the interesting thing is, and I don't know why they're not doing this, they haven't advertised it yet. So most people pay the $50 or $25 or $35 to get a shuttle. There's a lower cost bus route available, goes just a quarter mile or half mile from the airport. So how can we make sure that we are also kind of maybe building out infrastructure for rail system or something else as an alternative for those? I'm very concerned that if we build in just the airport expansion, which I know will be funded by the FAA and not by Prescott, we won't have to come up with the money for that. How can we kind of guarantee that it's not just simply addressing the needs of one class of resident?
Well, I don't think it's addressing just a class of residents, because I think the pivotal point for the airport is to bring jobs here. And I'm looking at more for business class. Because here's my thing, and I have a video on my Facebook, and it addresses about jobs and development, and also it's on my website. But with the CEOs coming here, that's the link for our future. Because here's the thing, with our pension liability, we're not going to sales tax our way out. 443 we're not going to pay it down in 10 years with the revenue projected $10 million a year. That I can tell you that with my research. The other thing is the pension board isn't investing the way out. We have to grow our way out, and we have these kids here that are so bright, whether Embry-Riddle, whether Prescott College, whether Yavapai College. Here's the thing, we don't even have a programming degree at Yavapai College. We have 1.4 million jobs available in the next year, starting at $85,000 a year for coding jobs. This is crazy that Yavapai College isn't offering this. When these CEOs are coming in and they want to look to start their satellite offices here, let's offer them this great pool of talent from our kids. Coming out of high school, what are we offering them? So I'm looking to have, but who wants to drive up and down I-17 to get to Sky Harbor? That's what I'm looking at. And that's why the airport expansion is critical for our area. I don't think anybody wants to drive up and down I-17 anymore.
And the situation would just get worse if our population grows. I mean, that would be that many more cars. It's a very, I wouldn't say treacherous, but it's a pretty fast and windy road.
Oh, it's crazy.
So a little bit like a roller coaster. I really like what you're saying about attracting businesses.
And these are low water use, high tech jobs. They're clean. I'm not talking about putting a cement factory on Gurley Street.
Right.
You know, but these are things that we can offer our kids. Everybody wants their kids, you know, they all leave. The only thing we export here are best and brightest kids. It's a sin.
Yep. Let's go on to the last topic. That would be water management. And thank you so much for bringing the questions. Now I buried them somewhere.
And I'm going to have to refer to my notes when you talk about them.
Yeah, the one candidate forum that I was really interested in and missed was the Citizens Water Advocacy Group Forum. Oh, there it is. And I thank you for bringing the questions from that because I missed this forum. These are all water-related questions, and let's take them. Let's start with this question number 2. Building a pipeline from northwest of the town of Paulden and importing water from the Big Chino Aquifer is currently Prescott's strategy for increasing the city's declining water supply. Before the Big Chino pipeline project proceeds any further, should the city of Prescott hire a consultant to prepare a comprehensive study of potential alternative water sources, which would include aggressive conservation, direct potable reuse of effluent, stormwater runoff collection, and extensive rainwater harvesting? And what was your answer?
My answer was that the ADWR, they're the independent expert, and it showed that in their 4th management plan that we will need to be supplemented by the Big Chino pipeline. And also, we are legally entitled to this water. The legislature said this as well. My concern of having yet another consultant in here to say that we need this water, you know, at this point, I'm concerned about paying for yet another thing to tell us that we need this water. My other concern is just even that is the stormwater runoff. You get into surface water rights.
Right.
So that concerns me even to throw that out there.
And I know the major study on the Verde River, that's a multi-million-dollar study. I mean,
Right.
that's a big study, and it's been going on for many years.
It's I think we're 3 years or into
Yeah.
an 8 years.
Yeah, we're still many
Yes.
years away from having the results of that hydrological study.
Right.
The next question involves that study about the Verde River. I'm going to skip the description
Sure.
and just jump to the question. If the results of the Verde River study establish that the pipeline project will reduce the flow in the upper Verde River, will you support a plan that will prevent the reduction, even if that protection doubles or triples the cost of the project?
Here's the reality of it. That pipeline project is the only legally available water supply we have. So everybody keeps talking about the cost. If we need the water, how much are you going to pay for a bottle of water when you're really thirsty?
Right.
The other thing is, and this has been my problem with this agreement. We have an agreement with SRP, Prescott Valley, and Prescott. And I actually brought the agreement because, and I read from it, it says we have the duty to mitigate anything if we impact the Verde. If we walk away from that agreement and then Prescott sells the Big Chino Water Ranch,
Mm-hmm.
that next developer has no duty to mitigate. So think about that. I think it behooves CWAG and other people that keep fighting this to work with us because we have the duty to mitigate. I always feel like people are like, stop the pipeline. Here's the deal. That land, no different than the Deep Well Ranch, that was going to be developed. That land will be developed. Why not work with the people who have the duty to mitigate?
Right, but then also in that is the idea of maybe slowing the development down enough that you can make this transition more well thought out than just simply, we're going to get the results of the hydrological study, we've already got this development underway, and we discover, oh, the study says there's less water than we thought, or the impact will be greater than we thought, or our developing out will affect those downstream from us. Because we have to respect their rights as well. We don't want to get tied up in litigation by taking away water from other communities. So do you think obviously the hydrological study will be the conclusive evidence of this, but do you think that there is enough water to do all of these things that we're planning, building out, annexing deep well, and so on? Do you think there's enough water available?
Well, like I said, they have access to 900 acre feet. It's already in our portfolio. That's irrespective of the big chain.
Right.
These downstream users in the Verde, they don't mitigate at all, and they use a lot of water. And I think people, they're looking at us that we're affecting the Verde. We're not pumping from the Verde right now, and I think that's another thing that
that's
gets
actually
lost.
a very important point.
Yeah, and I think that gets lost in the conversation.
I believe in the League of Women's Voter Forum, it was brought up that actually per capita Prescottonians are more water efficient than most other communities nearby.
We've actually, our population has gone up and our use has gone down. So, and this is it. This is where the pocketbook works.
Yep.
If you start charging people more for the more water they use, they shut off the tap.
Do you think we can become even more efficient?
I think so.
Through education?
Yeah, and that's why I think, and I praise CWAG up and down.
Rainwater capture and so on.
Yeah, I think, it's something that's just starting to get out there, rainwater harvesting.
Right.
I think people, it's like recycling. I think people want to do the right thing. I really do. You educate them. This is why I think I do what I do. I like to research. I like to get it out there to people in simple terms. And I think CWAG has done a fabulous job at it. They get education to people. You explain it in simple terms, and people are like, yeah, I could do that. And, you start doing those kind of things. And, I always truly believe this. You give people all the information, and I think they end up doing the right thing. But they have to, be given all the information.
There's anywhere between 1 and 3 roommates who live here, and I find that when it's just me, I am ridiculously efficient with water. Hardly ever doing laundry. I keep it to a minimum. I don't even want to say how many days go by before I bathe, but it's actually something based on a San Francisco ethic, where it's actually arose in San Francisco after I moved away from San Francisco, but there was a movement of people who said, we don't really need to be this harsh on our utilities. I don't need to go out and buy aspirin. I don't need to do this. They actually reduced their consumerism quite a bit, which obviously has economic impacts as well. But in addition, they're among the most efficient living people in San Francisco, the people who kind of adopt this.
It's funny, that's just the way I was raised.
Yeah.
Something silly that you read later as an adult, like when we were brushing our teeth, my mother made us shut the water off. We brush your teeth, turn the water back on. And then when I met my niece and nephew growing up in California, they're brushing their teeth, the water's running the whole time. I'm like, what are you doing? But this is how you can raise your children.
Yep.
But you left the room, that light switch went off.
Yep. I'm the same way. In fact, I first noticed it when I was 14 years old, or 13, I should say, visiting my Danish relatives for the first time. And they have, their hot water heater is this little thing above the shower. This is their hot water heater, and it's maybe 2 gallons or 3 gallons. And they couldn't believe when my brother and I showed up, and my mom and my dad, how much we were going through water. They looked at us like these crazy, wasteful Americans. And that image has always stuck in my mind. Electrically, the U.S. per capita uses more electricity than any other nation on the planet, and it's just because we're used to. Today I had to turn on all the lights for the cameras, but we keep these lights off.
Right, it's the way I was raised, and you're right. If you're not raised like that, and you're right, the ugly American.
Well, there's things we can all do. It's a matter of being conscious, but I think that if we are gonna. It's self-awareness. I think honestly, if we do say we're going to expand, this is going to happen one way or the other. Let's do it smartly. Smartly may mean modifying our own behavior so that we are less impactful. We drive less. We use electricity. We use less water.
Lessen your footprint.
Yeah.
Right. I use my bicycle for errands all the time.
And as I said off camera, I'm very jealous. I used to bike ride, and my asthma kind of kicked up. I have to get back on my bike. I'm going to skip the last 2 questions. Okay. Let's just say if you want to address any issue whatsoever, this is your time. and then we'll close it up. If there's anything you can think of that you want to say to people.
Well, I've been known to work with everyone politically, and when I was in law school, it's not known for a bastion of conservatism when you were in law school, but my professors, even though I'm conservative, always came up to me and said, we never met anyone like you, that you work with everyone. It didn't matter their religious persuasion, didn't matter what color, it didn't matter if they were gay, that you were amazing, that you had friends of everyone. And it was, they just came up to me when I was graduating. They said it was really a pleasure to meet you and see how you were able to make friends with everyone. And I think that was also my work with the Structured Sober Living Home Bill, is to work with people from all different persuasions. And because it was about doing the right thing, and for that project, it was raising the standard of care. And it's just doing the right thing, and that's my philosophy of being mayor, and is doing the right thing for the people. So I appreciate this time. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad we could have you here, and also with Jean Wilcox. I honestly think for mayoral candidates, you are the two most intelligent, most qualified candidates.
I agree. Jean's a fine woman. She really is.
I hate to leave one person out, but I don't have a whole lot of respect, I got to say. Yeah, and I thank you for coming by, and we'll try and get this up online today or tomorrow.
Thanks.
Is there anything in that whole thing that you didn't feel comfortable with that you would like to see chopped out? I always give people the opportunity to
I think it's okay.
redo something.
I appreciate this, really. I appreciate you doing this, and it was very, very kind of you. I thought your questions were all good. They were well thought out.
I didn't really follow them that closely, but we kind of wing it. Oh, wow, we went for over an hour. I knew it was long. I didn't realize it was that long.
Well, you're a good talker. You're a good interviewer. So, well, if you have to chop stuff out, that's fine.
What my plans are, there will be kind of two versions. There will be long format, relatively non-edited versions of each candidate separately, and then somehow or another, I'm going to take all of this and make specific questions. One candidate says this, the other candidate says this. It won't always be Gene U.
Sure.
It'll be mixed up in the order.
Sure.
But specific questions will be reduced down, and I'm hoping to get it down to maybe 20 minutes. There's nobody.
Neat. Now, where's this getting sent?
This is going to get sent to the link's 3 presences: YouTube, Facebook, and the Internet Archive. On the Internet Archive, just so you know, my policy is anything that goes there is in the public domain. So all the raw video will be there as well. If anybody, including yourself, ever wants to take anything, recut it, repurpose it, you don't need my permission. It's in the public domain. And audio. Yeah, this is actually a really important question.
Yeah.
And second segment, this will be a short segment. Slate. Interestingly, when I saw you on July 18th, there was a question I didn't get to ask, but I thought it was an important one. And that is, this has to do with the mayor having to administer whatever the voters decide regarding Proposition 443. So let's say Proposition 443 fails, and we are facing the $78 to $80 million liability in the coming year that we are facing. What would be your plan for paying that liability in the coming year?
Excellent question. Well, I think that I just came into some recent knowledge about our cash and investments, and that was $123.5 million. There is no legal impediment that we cannot use those investments. My plan would be to put a large chunk of those investments down as a down payment on that pension liability. That would greatly drop our pension liability payment, and I think we would comfortably make our payment to PSPRS from our general fund.
Okay. From my notes from July, you were saying that raising residential taxes would be an option. Do you think that's an option to raise enough money, or?
No, I never. You mean property tax?
Property taxes.
Yeah, no, I never said that, and that's not even feasible. By the time you actually have to put the notice out, and the amount of it raises about $30,000.
Yeah, it's not nearly the right.
Property
ballpark.
taxes and
okay.
Yeah.
I may have
not an
misunderstood
yeah,
the answer.
Yeah, that's not an option for the city. Yeah.
Okay.
But no, my option right now is we have the investments that we can do, and the amount of interest we're paying in that pension liability is 7.4. It's whatever the expected rate of return is, and we're earning only 1.68 on those investments. So what we would save on that interest that we're paying out versus what we're earning, we can actually.
So
we would be the lender of record, so to speak. We'd be borrowing money from ourselves and paying it back.
So it's your opinion that even without the sales tax, the city would have enough money to pay down the liability, but it would have to be done in a very creative fashion.
Yes,
And you think you could steward that?
Yes, but we also absolutely must continue to fight for structural reform, because without it, this same nonsense is going to continue.
Right. Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
That's just to synchronize everything. All right, and before you say anything, let me shut off everything. No, I really appreciate your